Alexa, turn on studio. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. It is Hoopsville. I have a voice for now. And the coughing has already started. I've got tea that I've been guzzling, and I've got so many other things. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Welcome in to the Hoopsville Studios. I want to thank, for starters, Pat Coleman for filling in for me this morning on the NCAA shows. You would have seen us here, but I don't know if I would have gotten to this show or even through the women's show. Hacking up quite a bit. Not really hacking, it's just the voice is done. So we'll get through today's show. Thanks to Pat doing the heavy lifting earlier, and we'll have some fun with it. NCAA brackets are out. Men's and women's roads to Salem and Fort Wayne/Indy are done and dusted. We're going to hear from both national committee chairs here on this show. We will hear from our experts in terms of the brackets, in terms of prognostication, and answering your questions as best we can. So send them our way. We were going to try and show some of the great reactions on today's show, but just not enough time. If you have a great reaction, send it to us. We will feature them on Thursday's show for sure. Yes, I have a voice for now. We'll see. I'm already noticing it's cracking a bit. So the brackets are out. Lots of questions, obviously, for people who are uneducated. We'll use those terms, or don't understand the whole process. We'll try and answer you those questions. So you can email us, hoopsville@d3sports.com. That's hoopsville@d3sports.com. You can also send them in our live stream if you'd like on YouTube. We'll try and pay attention to that. And we'll try to, you can also tweet us at D3Hoopsville, hashtag Hoopsville. That's where we're definitely sitting, and we'll do our best to answer questions there as well. So much to talk about, so many matchups to discuss, and to waste little time, we're going to go straight to the Hoopsville Hotline to discuss the women's bracket. Joining us there, it's not previously recorded. That's for later. I'll take that off the screen. But joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline live is Kristin Hughes, Athletics Director at Smith College and the women's chair. Kristin, good to see you. How are you?
I'm great, Dave. How are you?
I'm here.
Well, listen, if you lose your voice, we could switch this and I could ask you questions, right? So don't worry, I've got your back.
Sure, we could switch it. That'd be an interesting role reversal.
Well, it was a late night, but not as late as maybe some in the past. I think some of the pre-work we had done was helpful, and but if I'm being honest, most of it was blown up because there were just so many upsets, honestly, over the weekend. So, I think right around before midnight, I think we were calling it complete.
All right. In comparison to what we know for the men, it's about the same. So that's not too bad. Excuse me. I guess I may have muted myself, so didn't hear your first question after that. Hopefully that's been resolved and I'm back on here. I was just basically asking Kristin how long they worked. Looks like you got 4 flights. I think you would have maybe liked more. You got a Texas pod that I have a gut feeling wasn't the plan. Were you trying to get more flights, break up things, not have that old-fashioned Texas pod?
Yeah, I mean, I think before that final game of last night, we had a bracket that worked pretty well, but to be honest, it had more flights in it, and that's always a challenge, right? Every year, it probably sounds like a broken record at this point, but I think it's the reality. I think if you had done a bracket that, I'll call it a perfect bracket. None of them are, but maybe as close as we can get to it, the number of flights that we would have had to use not only in that first weekend, but projecting out in terms of what we think could happen, or if seeds didn't hold, you kind of give a range of how many flights it could be, and the numbers were getting pretty big, which makes sense, right? If you have to fly a lot in the first and second round, you're probably flying a lot, in that sectional round, and it was just too many to be able to do that. So we definitely had to create that Texas pod, and then kind of refigure everybody else around that.
In your ideal, not necessarily perfect, but you can certainly say perfect too. We do get that from Cam a little bit later, kind of tongue in cheek, but in your ideal bracket, how many flights did you think you were going to need?
Probably, 6 to 7.
What's the general answer when you submit a bracket like that? There's 6 or 7 sitting there. What is the general reaction from the NCAA and whomever that is that delivers? Obviously, we know who delivers the news, but whoever decides on it. What is their answer to you when you submit something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's never like black and white, like here's the number you have to hit. I think when you get into that high of a number though, and then again, you're thinking about what's going to happen the following weekend, and you're talking about a range, right? And that range could be, look, on the low end, if the seats hold or if they don't, depending on where you put people, we could have another 4 flights, but that could also get up to 9 potentially. And I think when you're looking at those numbers, and I get it, the NCAA has to look at the whole, possibility of things, right? And so when you start to look at those numbers, I think it's not so much, hey, we're only going to give you this number of flights, is go back to work and redo this in a different way and see if you can get that number lower, which is, what we did.
So we hinted at this on Sunday because we had gotten some information on some potential hosts who had not put in some paperwork. One of them we were able to confirm, and we know, was that Transylvania women would have been a perfect place to host because you can get so many teams to them. Not being able to use them as a host, does that also precipitate kind of the flight situations that you got yourself into and got cornered into the Texas pod? If they could have been able to host, you can maybe make some arrangements and move some teams around and lessen the impact?
I mean, possibly. I think, there's a few issues around the hosting, right? If you've got schools that, could potentially have served as a host, but you don't have a bid from them. And then also like even with, WashU and lacrosse crossover with the men, right? So those 2 schools aren't able to host, with the men having priority in the first weekend. So that has an impact, and then like wherever you go to next, obviously you're trying to fit in what schools can get there. So the hosting of course is, it's significant when you're trying to put all the pieces together. It's hard to narrow it down to like, the one example that you're leaning in on, because there's impact across an entire bracket. But I will say broadly, it is easier when you have more options to host and more places to get people to, right? It just gives you a lot more flexibility when you're building a bracket.
When obviously you avoid the Texas hope, that's always the dream in that sense. How do you then deal with it? Like, obviously you created the Texas pod, but is there a way of trying to argue to the NCAA, listen, we get it, we got restrictions, but we're really trying to avoid either conference rematches, or we're trying to avoid the idea that all these Texas teams have to play through each other again, or we even have a Texas first round game. I know that others have been flown in. Like, how do you make the argument? I know it obviously didn't work. I get that, but what's the argument you're trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes back to really like the competitive equity. You're trying to build a bracket, and have the matchups. If you think of it as like an S going through your 64 teams, you're trying to build a bracket where you're having the best competitive matchups, and not thinking initially, right, about who's hosting and flights and locations and all of that. But between flights, between geographic proximity, I mean, there's so many things that come into it that are really different at the D3 level. But the big argument you try to make is this is probably what's best for the game, right? This is the best bracket to reward the body of work of these programs, and hopefully preserve the experience too, and make it as fair as possible. To be honest, I think we did a pretty good job with our bracket in that respect for the most part. And we're also trying to think about things like, the experience for some of these teams. So, for example, you might be able to get a team to a certain location and you have it under the 500-mile limit, but maybe it's at 490. Well, that's not a great experience, right? To be in a bus for 490 miles. So we might pull that team out and say, all right, we can get them to a different location at more like 300 miles. And that's probably a better experience for them. So thinking about things like that really come into play as well.
For anybody wondering the difference there, it's about a 3-some-odd-hour drive, 190 miles, give or take, depending on the speed of the bus and the roads they're on. When it comes to this Texas spot, I feel like there's some ripple effects. As a result, DePaul and River Falls, for example, seem like 2 seeds, but they're down on the 3 seed lines. Is that kind of the ramifications of this, because you had to kind of make a non-traditional pod down there with the way it's seeded? You had to sacrifice some seeds elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say we necessarily sacrificed seeds. We definitely had to move some people around, in groupings. We couldn't just go very straightforward, with our 1 through 4. We had to move some things around to that respect, but we tried to stay true if we had to do that in terms of like, if you were a, you know, 32 to 33, right? Probably not a huge difference maybe between those two schools, like things like that we tried to do. We also tried to really initially focus in on really like the top 32 teams and how they were being matched up against each other. That was important to us. So I think we did a pretty good job with that, but there's definitely some shuffling, but there is with the geographic proximity too. I mean, it's not just about that Texas pod. There's certainly things that happen when you're trying to fit people, places. And, this was a little challenging because so much of the field was in the Midwest, so you're trying to get so many schools to these Midwest sites that have earned the right to host. And so that was the other thing that really, really played into it and made it, I think challenging this year for us.
Well, it looks like you had a couple of with that Midwest too that played in. Is Illinois Wesleyan and Chicago were both set to host on the men's side, which we don't have a direct pod got moved somewhere else ramification because you had two of those, but it does seem like those two hosting on the men's side may have played an impact on how you bracketed a lot of other things.
I don't know if that so much happened. I mean, I think that obviously there were a lot of upsets in the conference tournaments, right? And so there are a lot of shuffling in this last weekend, and probably a lot more than maybe somebody would have guessed heading into it. I think that certainly had an impact. But I think obviously we had to move the Wash U one and the lacrosse pod, and trying to move it to places that obviously made sense from a seed perspective, but then also from a geographic perspective.
You've got Illinois Wesleyan over at Hope. They're playing Washington and Jefferson. Hope's got Barron on the other side of them. Chicago's at Whitewater, where they're playing Gustavus Adolphus. Was there any thought of swapping Chicago and IWU? They seem like they could be a perfect swap to balance things maybe a little tad more, or what was your view on it?
Dave, I'm not really sure that we thought that there was, that was necessarily a better pod if we had switched them. We talked about it a little bit. We also tried and go back and look at where we've sent teams, the previous, like at least year, if not 2 years back, try to take a look at that. So that has a little bit of play. Try not to send somebody back to the same side, or try to not send the same team always to Wisconsin. Things like that played into it. And so some of those things I think were factors in terms of how we try to build out some of those pods.
Going back to DePaul for a moment, looking at their scenario, they're going to Carroll to play Carroll, and then Wisconsin lacrosse and LaGrange are on the other side of that. Any thought of swapping them with Gustavus Adolphus, just in terms, again, that's kind of impacts Chicago. So you would have had a Chicago DePaul game or Illinois Wesleyan. I mean, this trickles out, right, a little bit. But those are the kinds of things we see of just looking at seating and balance and stuff. Are those kinds of conversations you're all having?
Yeah, definitely, right? And as you just said, you move one and it's not, I know that Cam has referred to the bracketing as Jenga. I almost felt like it's like Rubik's Cube. Like you get one side set and you think it looks really good, but then the rest of it's just a mess. And so then you just got to try to keep spinning it. DePaul, we talked a lot. It sounds like they've been sent to Hope quite a bit. So we, didn't want to really do that. So we tried to be, again, careful about, if we can, not having teams go back to areas that they've been sent to recently. And then trying to balance that with maybe who they played, non-conference, all those things. And it was pretty rare for us to have a conversation just around one school. It usually, if you were talking about one school, that meant you were probably talking about three in terms of how you were shifting things. So there's layers to it for sure.
Looking out to the second weekend, I find something interesting. While they restricted you on the opening weekend in terms of flights, the second weekend could be bountiful, as it were, as it has been in years past. The upper left's got NYU, Hardin-Simmons, Bowdoin, and Carroll as hosts. Obviously, others can come out of these. Scranton, Bates, Hopkins, Concordia, Moorhead. in the lower left. John Carroll, Denison, Bethel, Washington Lee seems possible. Whitewater, Hope, Ohio Wesleyan, Oshkosh certainly possible, but you get some other results here, and this could be a lot more flights. Is it more about, do you think, from the NCAA that they'll take whatever happens in the second weekend, whereas the first weekend, let's limit it a bit more in case we have to deal with it second weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're only going to be able to control so much, right? So we have a little bit of impact, obviously, going in the first weekend in terms of where we place people. We try to, kind of play out the pods and say, all right, if who you're lining up with who, and how many of those teams can actually drive. If a seed holds, how many will we have to fly? So certainly we had those kinds of conversations. But at the end of the day, right? I mean, this is the beauty of the tournament. Anybody can win. Anybody can pull an upset. These are all really talented, really strong programs. So at that point, I don't know how much you can control it, right? So you do the best you can, and you set it up, and you see what happens. But we talk about it, we try to play it out, but obviously that's why you play the game, right? You don't really know who's going to win till final buzzer.
Curious what everybody did on the committee. Like, did you mentioned last night you're going to lose 2 members off of it, so you're down to 8. Did everybody work on everything together? Did you divvy up responsibilities? How did it all work?
Everyone pretty much works together, we got some people that are working on the mileage, some people looking at, who's played a non-conference, some people making sure that, again, like, where did we send to school last year? So different things like that. A lot of color coding was happening, a lot of Google Sheets were going back and forth before we loaded it into the NCAA software. So it's a lot of conversations like that. And kind of playing with pods, and then letting everybody sit with it for a minute, and then trying to come back with fresh eyes and say, all right, what are we missing, or where could something maybe be a little bit tighter?
When it comes to game times, they are now out. You can go to d3hoops.com to see them, but we know, not like the men where it's spread out necessarily. You guys have a slightly different strategy when it comes to that, but what was the strategy when he came up with the game times for different pods?
Yeah, we've actually even tightened it up a little more this year. The feeling was that the first thing is that a couple host sites have requests on game times for a number of reasons. Maybe they've got another event that day, or it's something around their event management. We try to accommodate those. We don't have a lot of them. We had a couple. And that first game time obviously drives your second game time. But we've tightened up the start times because I think it's really important to prioritize what we're doing for the teams. And if you're playing a game at 4:00, that feels really early if you're trying to get a practice and a meal in. So we've actually backed some of those start times to a little bit later to give a little bit more time for teams to have practices, have a pregame meal, let the host sites really get that gym ready, that facility ready. And then we are very consistent with the Saturday game times being 24 hours after whatever that second game is on Friday. We think that's really important to protect that time, preserve that, so that you get that full 24 hours before you got to come back and play that game again. So you'll see that throughout our game times, that we've kind of condensed those Friday times, and we hold pretty solid in that 24-hour window going into Saturday.
I'm curious, didn't really dive into it when we discussed this before, but obviously with Yeshiva, there's an exception on the men's side. They've got to get them played early because of religious restrictions that come into play later. But you talk about, the facility. Obviously, we understand facility needs, and we talk about the teams not wanting to play too early. But on the men's side, they're willing to go there and have earlier games and spread out the tournament because there's been such a reaction from everybody, both teams and schools and fans and those who watch around the country, of being able to see as many games as possible, very much D1-esque, being able to spread the event out as much as possible. Granted, we can't split into 2 days, which would be wonderful for the opening round. Where's the difference in those opinions come from? Because the men are willing to do it and have not faced any blowback about it. You're saying on the women's side, there seems to be more of a wish to play later games.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the men. What I'll say for the women is, and I've said it a lot. I think we need to prioritize this experience for these teams and what is best for these programs. And I don't think playing a game at 11 a.m. is a good experience. I don't think that gives teams adequate time to prep, to get ready, to do film, to practice. And I think that these are big games. And don't get me wrong, obviously we want to promote the game, we want our fans to watch, but at the end of the day, what should drive, in my opinion, all of our decisions is what is best for these competing teams. And I think a later time just lets them build their day better. And I think, your fans are going to get there and support you. And if this means that maybe someone, from a different location can't watch, all three games, that's a different challenge that I think lands in a much less impactful way than it does on a team who's, feeling squeezed or playing at a time that they normally don't play at. I just don't think that that's necessarily what we're trying to build an experience around.
Well, to be fair, no one's asking for 11 a.m. I don't think anybody would want that. Yeshiva's the earliest game at 1 p.m. on the men's side, and that's only for their specific reasons that they need to have. But to be a devil's advocate, conference games, which are pretty important, are played at 1 and 3, often on Saturdays or earlier days. The only times they're played at, even those times in the middle of the week during non-school times. So that's why I'm saying if those games are being played, then that's why I'm curious. Well, even conference championship games are being played at those games. So that's why I'm kind of curious about the timing.
Yeah, I mean, I would just back that up. Like if you're thinking about the Friday games, I don't think playing at 4 o'clock on a Friday is a prime time to be playing a basketball game. I think it's hard for fans who are trying to get to a game, parents who are trying to drive in, because most of them are going to come in on that day. It's a really hard time for them to get there. And again, I think it shortens the day. So I think the Friday night, to me, is where it needs to get pushed back. The Saturday, I agree with you. A Saturday afternoon game, that's probably what people are used to playing, but not if you had to play a 7:30 game on Friday night. So protecting that 24-hour window so that teams have enough time, not just to rest, but, coaches are leaving the gym late. They've got to do film review. They've got to do breakdown. They're trying to plan a shooter.
I don't think anybody,
right? Like all those things.
Yeah, I don't think anybody doubts the 24-hour thing whatsoever.
Yeah,
No,
so I just think that the Friday drives the Saturday time. And I think, again, that those earlier times on Friday, to me, don't seem just the best experience for those teams. And like, I won't get off of my soapbox here, Dave, but like I always struggle when I see programs that are playing at 12 noon or something. I don't, that has never made sense to me, either as an AD or as a coach, to be very honest.
Yeah, I understand. I appreciate the insight. It was kind of curious. I meant to ask follow-ups before and hadn't had that opportunity. So I appreciate that. Certainly something we can discuss more. It's always interesting to hear different ideas on it. When you looked at this bracket, when you guys put it all together, what was kind of the things that you guys got intrigued the most by? What piqued your ears, as it were, a little bit to what got put together?
I don't know if I'd use the word intrigued. I think we tried to really balance it out as best we could. I think we felt good about, where the ones and twos got lined up with each other. Again, I think the challenge was just so many Midwest spots. So really trying to fit people in. And I mentioned this earlier, really trying to pull a couple schools out that just felt like, yeah, we could get them there, but that's not going to be a great experience. And to be able to ship that around, I think that felt better after we were able to talk some of those things through. So I think it's so dependent on this geographic proximity. And I know it's beaten like a dead horse, but it really just plays so much into how we build it. So those were definitely the challenges. I think we got through it, the best we could, knowing that we were going to have to build that Texas pod as well.
And what were probably the biggest hurdles? Obviously flights. We know that, not getting what you wanted there, but any other particular hurdles?
I mean, the flights is always really going to be the biggest challenge, because if that's eliminated, then it really shifts how you can do things, right? It just gives you so much more flexibility. So that by far is the biggest challenge. I would say the other two things, and I've talked about them both, the upsets coming into it, there was a lot of shifts and a lot of changes in the rankings and all of that.
Any in particular that stand out?
I mean, there was a lot of upsets, right? I mean, Bates over Bowdoin, Johns Hopkins going down. I mean, I think there's a number of teams which in some ways makes it exciting, right? There's probably going to be a lot of parity in this tournament. So there's two ways to look at it. Strictly from the committee perspective, in terms of work, you're like, well, I thought that, nope, now I got to think this. So, that shifts things. And again, there's so many teams from the Midwest. So just trying to figure out how to get people places. Those are definitely some of the challenges.
Has your coach knocked down your door yet, complaining or having her opinions about what you guys have set up for her?
She's too busy getting ready for our next game. She doesn't complain too much. So she's heads down. She's ready to go.
No, I figured as much. Didn't expect Lynn to be knocking down your door.
She's a Mainer, Dave. She's just going home. It's okay for her.
This is true. Good point. Kristin, I appreciate the time. I'm sure we could unpack this a million other ways and go round and round and round and round and round. But we'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time. Appreciate the insight. Appreciate the work. And I'll look forward to catching up with you later. But in the meantime, we'll always give the guests the final word. Any final thoughts you want to share with those tuned in?
Well, again, I say this at the end of every interview with you. Just appreciate the way you promote the game. And I think it's great, certainly for women's basketball, but just for D3. And I just think it's a super exciting time, excited for so many of these programs. And, there's not 3 weeks where maybe some places the weather's good. It's not so great at our end, but it's a great way if you're going to be inside, this is a great way to spend your next 3 weeks. So thanks for having me on. Yeah,
it was snowing before I came down to the studio today, down in my neck of the woods. I see sun behind you, but I have a feeling.
Yeah, keep that snow, Dave. I don't want any more snow.
You guys got what I wanted last week. It glanced us and slammed you. I wanted the slam for my birthday. Hey, Kristin, thanks again for the time. Appreciate it. Look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Okay, thanks so much.
Kristin Hughes joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline. Appreciate her time joining us. If you got more questions for us, we'll certainly do our best to answer them. You can email us, hoopsville@d3sports.com, or you can join us on our live stream, where I know a number of people are in there. I'm sorry I didn't see them a little bit earlier. We can certainly talk about game times a little bit later on how the women tackled that. I'm going to take a quick break, mainly because I got to get some water. Ryan Scott will join us here briefly. We'll also be hearing from Pat Coleman and Scott Peterson at some point during this broadcast as well. And Cam Fuller coming up a little bit later on the men's side. We'll dive into their brackets as well. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA studios.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit nabc.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC1927. That's nabc.com or NABC1927 on social media.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
In any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
Waste as little time as possible. Get right back and going. Welcome back to the Hoopsville Studios. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Thanks for tuning in to this special breakdown of the brackets. It is a little earlier than we normally do. We just heard from Kristin Hughes on the women's side, the committee chair. We will hear from the men's committee chair, Cam Fuller, in just a bit. But we're going to stick to the women's side while we have it, and while we can talk to Ryan Scott, who is the bracketologist, as it were. Don't forget to support our work, by the way, at buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville, though I need a tea today. Buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville is how you can support us, and Ryan Scott joins us on the Hoopsville Hotline to talk about this women's bracket primarily, but we'll also talk a smidge about the men before we let them go. But on the women's side, you just got the chance to listen to Kristin as well. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I fed you a couple of questions ahead of time to ask her. So you asked things that I was interested in. But overall, I mean, obviously I think we're all disappointed to see that Texas pod come up, everyone except Hardin Simmons, I guess. But the reality of the flights was always going to be an issue. We were thinking about if Hendricks had won that instead of Austin, then they would have been forced to fly 6 teams someplace. But the reality is that would have probably limited what they could do with the bracket for the second weekend, right? Doing it this way probably saves them 1 flight maybe over the course of the tournament, but it gives them more the second weekend, which allows us to have some of these cool matchups, that, you might see a Texas team in New York or somebody from the Midwest playing Bowdoin, in the second weekend. And I think probably if you're giving the committee a choice, they're going to choose more flexibility the second weekend than the first. And so even though that's a pod that's a little bit regrettable, that probably is what it came down to.
Yeah, it is regrettable. And again, depending on how different things break down, who puts into host, who makes the tournament, right? And I made this point earlier. You take the same number of flights equal, and you're going to see, based on who's in the tournament, a different way of bracketing. On the men's side, we don't have a Texas pod, and with the same amount of flights, but it depends on who's in it, right? So there's so many variables here.
Right. And you look back, if you look at our mock bracket that's on the site, we had 6 flights in the first round, but only 2 or 3 the second weekend. This one's going to work out to 4 the first weekend and maybe 4 or 5 the second weekend. So it's close, but again, it is going to make this a more national bracket next week than it does this week, right? And I do think that's what they want to highlight, right? The final 16 teams and trying to keep teams from playing each other at that point. But other than that, I think they did an incredible job of sticking to seeding and using the limitations that they had, right? If you look overall, you say, well, there's some disappointments here, but given the limitations we have in Division III, I have very, very few quibbles at all. I think you mentioned, swapping Illinois Wesleyan and Chicago, and that was the only thing I could find that might improve this a little bit, keeping the same number of flights. So I mean, hats off to them. It was not an easy picture. And like she said, Bates winning on that last day, threw an extra host into Maine, which complicates things as well. And they really rolled with that extremely well.
Yeah, I mentioned Gustavus and DePaul as well, but yeah, I mean, we're kind of picking at things at this point in time. I'll have some thoughts later on regarding game times. I'm not fully on board with the mentality, but we don't need to dive into that now. But yeah, I mean, you saw the challenges that they had. We knew the challenges. It sounds like they put one in that had 6 or 7, which clearly means 6 or 7 flights, which clearly means they were trying to break that pod up and get the teams out of Texas and go elsewhere with it. That's what you figured they were going to need to do, and it's too bad we didn't get it. But to your point, they are protecting the second weekend, right? They're protecting those top teams for a later date. Do you see any curveballs coming on what we might see in that second weekend, or what you might see coming in terms of hosting, or is someone's going to have to maybe start looking at the fact that they may not get the host if they get through?
I mean, there will always be some strange ones if there's some upsets we don't anticipate, but it looks like it's set up for 2 flights in that NYU bracket no matter what. So it kind of protects them. There's a chance that Washington and Lee bracket that maybe Denison has to host that because some teams can get in, from farther west. But if Bethel does come out, I think they end up at Washington Lee anyway. Scott will talk about some of this. He has a whole program that runs, bracketing odds and hosting odds for the second weekend. So I don't want to step on his thunder because he's going to be able to address it so much easier than I am. But I do think this is set up better. All the mocks we were doing had, the last 2 positions that are currently Scranton and Washington and Lee, and maybe losing that chance. And I think they both have a better chance to do that in this bracket than a lot of what we're mocking out. And that's because they're limiting flights the first weekend to have them available in the second.
Yeah, it's an interesting strategy, right? Let me just quickly, unless there's something else you can think of on the women's side, jump over on the men's real quick. Our friend Poppers had a question that I think is literally picking at nits. He says, why put Bates against Yeshiva and F&M against Cortland instead of F&M against Yeshiva and Bates against Cortland? He has Bates 28, Yeshiva 45, F&M 25, Cortland 38. You'll hear from Cam maybe why they went with what they did, but from your perspective, this feels like literally yin at one or the other.
Well, I mean, the one Bates is a head scratcher because they are one of the lower 2 seeds, like a pod 2 seed on the list. And there are other options. I've tweeted out just my, back of the envelope thing, a picture of how you could do it and keep the seating a little bit better. I have some suspicions, but I'll wait and reserve that until we hear what Cam actually has to say about how that went. I do think he's right. I think you can preserve the seating a little bit better with some of those 2 seeds, particularly on the East Coast. There wasn't a lot they could do in the Midwest. Those were pretty locked in. You had very few teams that could get to the places they needed to get to. But yeah, some of those on the 2 line in the East, I think they could have seeded a little bit better. But in the end, given some of the brackets we've had in the past, these are pretty small quibbles. I suspect Babson is the one. Babson is really far down and Bates is really high up. And if you could have found a way to bridge that gap a little bit more. And I think there are a number of ways to do that. That would have been better overall.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally quibbling, as it were. I'm sorry, I'm going back to my men's notes because I forgot something I wanted to ask you about, which I do ask about Cam. Not that I'm getting you're going to break anything to Cam. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the other thing is this illustrates the difference with NPI. Because in our past system, we would have had 16 1 seeds, 16 2 seeds, 16 3 seeds, 16 4. They wouldn't have really been ranked against each other unless they were in the same region. And so you could have just swapped, Babson and Bates, and nobody would have been the wiser, right? Because you wouldn't have really known where they were going to be ranked. But now we do have the numbers. And so I think the committee is maybe going to be held to a higher standard by some of us who look at these things and talk about it. And this one is better than last year, right? So it seems like we're making progress as we move through this, and they're having to learn some new ways to do it. So hopefully next year will be even better when it comes to holding seeds.
Quick side note, new top 25 literally going out as we speak. The new number 1 is Trinity, Connecticut. So they are not only the number 1 in the overall tournament, they are number 1 in the D3Hoops.com poll. Yet again, your thoughts?
Well, I voted for them. I switched from Macon to Trinity.
As did I.
This is the easiest in some senses. This is one of the easiest polls to do for the year because I really just look at these teams and I go, we have a tournament coming up. Which are the teams that I think are going to win games, and rank them? And obviously, as the defending champs, looking really good in that NESCAC tournament, this was easy for me to just pick Trinity and put them at the top because, I mean, if you're given odds, I think they've got to have the best.
Going back to the tournament, Redlands, you point out something Matt Snyder tweeted out that I had not spotted, that we could have still stuck with 4 flights, but had a pod at Redlands. Can you we'll talk to Cam about this. I'm going to preface this everybody right now. I think I caught him. He wasn't ready for it. I don't think they thought this through. So Ryan, can you explain it at least?
Right. So we have 4 flights, to do the minimum amount of flights for this group of teams would have been 2. You could have kept CMS in California at Redlands. You could have flown Whitworth in there and picked one other team to come in. That would have been 2. Everybody knew that was a bad idea. It would have really messed up other things in the bracket. And so we were all assuming it would be 3. That you would fly Whitworth, obviously out. They have to fly everywhere, fly the 2 California schools out, which is what they did. But what they threw the wrench in for us was that they flew Mary Hardin Baylor out of Texas, creating a 4th flight. And so if you had used those same 4 flights, you could have kept Redlands at home. You could have flown in Hood instead of going the other way, right? You could have flown in Susquehanna. You could have kept that pod almost the same. You would have had to move Mary Hardin Baylor back to Texas. You would have had to send Whitworth to California. I did, again, tweet out where the 3s could all move around to make it work geographically. But it's probably something, I mean, I didn't notice it until Matt pointed it out. And so it's very possible that the committee just didn't realize once they added that 4th flight that could have changed the way that they bracketed things. And obviously we're finding this out in hindsight and not after 10 hours of looking at spreadsheets. I'm sorry to Eric Bridgeland, who was definitely texting me saying, hey, are we going to get a chance to host? And I said, I don't see any way to do it. It never occurred to me to add an extra flight beyond the extra one we were already getting. So 4 flights could have made that happen. And this might, I don't know what Cam said about it, but it might have just been an oversight that they didn't realize either. It's interesting.
In all fairness to Cam, I don't think it fully registered when I told him. I think it's going to take some time to seep in. I'll be curious his response after the fact. We, again, recorded with him already. We'll air that coming up here shortly. Quickly, before I let you go, also, we talked about this a little bit, the Trinity pod, in sense that, you talked about Babson being the weaker of the two, Bates. Babson is the stronger of the two. We do talk with the Cam about this, but from your perspective, could they have shuffled things around and Babson not been on the other side of that, but at the same time not had a conference foe and Bates on the other side as a two?
Yeah, they wouldn't have been able to just switch them one for one. But again, I tweeted out a picture of a bracket that would have had it corrected if you really want to see all the details. But you could have moved some of those Eastern schools around to make that work out a little better for the seeding. And have a weaker 2 seed in there, which it really just comes down to the second round, because either St. Joe's or Babson, whoever comes out of there, is a stronger they're going to have a stronger opponent in Trinity than they might have otherwise. And if Babson comes out, that's going to be a stronger opponent for Trinity, your number 1 overall seed, than their seeding really deserves. And so there were some ways to make that happen. It was a little tricky with how many NESCACs were hosting. And also trying to avoid rematches, which they were very, very insistent, it seems, in this bracket of trying to keep rematches out of that first weekend as much as possible. But you could have done it, and there were a couple of ways to do it. And again, they may just have missed it as they're working through everything.
I'd like to see this term done away with officially, the pod of death. I don't think we have one. But the question came in, does Frederick, Virginia have the pod of death this season? I don't think so. I think they've got a very manageable pod there at Mary Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's not in comparison to the way that we've seen them before, right? Like, we have seen some where you'd have a pod with, 3 out of the top 15 teams in the country meeting in the first
We're talking
weekend.
WPI, Amherst, and Worcester State.
Right. That's not what I mean. What, if anything, I feel like the Hood one is tough, because you have, Redlands and Hood up there that are already really good. Susquehanna, who's on a run, right, winning 3 games in their conference tournament, and then Vassar, who is a really strong team from a good conference, right? Their rankings and their schedule get dropped down because they're losing conference games in a good conference. But I think there's a number of these that are really strong, really fun. And we're going to see plenty of upsets, but I don't think that's because the pods are too strong. I think that's because our bracket is too deep. Well,
right. Parity, right? Yeah. I think Mary Washington's got a very nice bracket there. And this isn't the Amherst of old. This isn't WPI as a behemoth or anything. If someone comes out of that upsetting Mary Washington, good for them. All right. Ryan, you want to tell everybody before we let you go what you're hoping to maybe accomplish this weekend?
Yeah, so before we get there, I got to start this evening on the bracket preview, so you'll get all of my thoughts fully formed in writing sometime tomorrow, probably. I'm also working on a story about the Gettysburg men's team. I already got some interviews set up to talk to them about that. I'm excited for that one. And then Friday, my plan at this moment, my wife I just hear her coming home from work, so we'll see how this goes on her end of things.
We see things getting thrown. We know how this goes.
My plan is to go up to Montclair and see the first game there. That's Yeshiva and Bates. That's going to be a split session. The second game's later, but it should give me enough time to drive over to Scranton, PA, and see the 2 women's games there, which don't start till 6 and 8:30, I think. And then stay overnight there. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that Redlands and Hood both win their first game, because Saturday, those are 2 of the fastest paced offensive-minded teams that we have in all of Division III, and I would just, as pure pleasure, really like to watch that basketball game Saturday night before I come back home. So that's kind of my tentative schedule if it all works out with the family. And they put that Saturday game at Hood at 5:30, which will even get me home at a decent hour that night. So everything is working out for me as if I can make it work.
I have to unfortunately fly out of town that night. Otherwise, I would join you, because that would be just a barn burner of fun one. I haven't been to Hood for a game in the NCAA tournament ever. Last time I was there for a conference tournament game, and it was forever ago. They were in the old CAC at the time. Hey, Ryan, appreciate the time. Any final thoughts for anybody?
No, I'm just really excited. Right? We do all these works. I've done, 45 or 50 mock brackets over the last couple of weeks, and you can see all the work that goes into this. I love that we've got all the rankings, because I can go back through all of the brackets and see their thought process and reverse engineer the decisions and figure that all out. It makes a lot of sense. And if anyone can tweet at me if they've got really insular or specific questions they want to ask, I'm happy to go into the nerdy details of all this stuff. But this is exciting. We got games together. We're making travel plans. Like, this is the time of year we love. I can't wait to see basketball and talk basketball as much as possible over the next 3 weeks.
Completely agree. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your insight. Look forward to catching up with you.
Thank you so much.
Going straight to Scott Peterson on the Hoopsville Hotline. No segue needed. Scott, good to see you. How are you, sir?
Doing good. Had less to do now that NPI is all done. So it's a feeling of peace and calm washing over me.
I understand, sir. Women's side, just your initial blush reaction.
Not very much to add to what Ryan said. Like, it's just a really strong bracket within the constraints that they were given, and it does set up for a really exciting national round of 16.
So let's take some fun stuff to go along with this one and break them into the quadrants. And from your analytical perspective and the data that we have, break it down into some fun. What would be considered your easiest quadrant, do you think?
So I have the easiest quadrant. Now, when you're looking at this at a quadrant level, the differences between the four are really, really small. But my easiest quadrant is NYU's quadrant, the average efficiency margin from the great folks over at D3 Datacast. The average efficiency margin of those 16 teams is 20 plus 23.6. Flip over to the easiest quadrant, the hardest quadrant is Scranton's, and their average efficiency margin is 26.5 for those 16 teams. So a difference of less than 3 points per 100 possessions between each of the four quadrants. And so at a quadrant level, they are very evenly balanced, and it makes sense that the easiest quadrant ended up at the number 1 overall seed, and the hardest quadrant ended up at the number 4 overall seed.
Oh, interesting. I didn't expect that. I'm not going to go necessarily to the next weekend yet, but let me jump on. Who do you think will have the easiest opening weekend?
So let's see here. Easiest opening weekend. So there's a couple ways to look at it. One way is that NYU and Scranton just are projected to have the easiest opening weekends because they're so incredibly strong. But if we're looking at just your opponents, let's see here. I think the most difficult pods that have the 4 strongest teams are the Washington and Lee pod and the Bates pod. So Washington and Lee has Gettysburg, Christopher Newport, and St. Mary's of Maryland in their pod, and the Bates pod has Smith, Union, and Merchant Marine. Those are my 2 most difficult pods to come out of. And then there's kind of the 4 easiest pods to come out of are all very regionally driven. So the easiest one is the Hardin-Simmons pod, followed by Concordia, Moorhead, Bethel, and Wisconsin Lacrosse / Carroll pod. Wisconsin Lacrosse being the highest seeded team in that pod, but the pod being hosted at Carroll.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so obviously everyone wants to know, who do we think could be hosting next weekend? You got to win, right? You got to win. We also want to know who might be marching their way towards a title with the way the brackets are broken down. So let's start with hosting. You got to win. Who's got the best chance of getting out of this first weekend and being in a position to host based on everything you know and your sims?
So there are only 2 teams who are guaranteed to host sectionals if they are in sectionals, and that is NYU and Scranton. There is no possible other 3 teams that can be in that sectional that would change the hosting from NYU or Scranton. Now, both for the Oshkosh quadrant and the Washington and Lee quadrant, about 3/4 of the time when they are in the quadrant, when they're in the sectional, they will host. And so if we're looking at the Oshkosh quadrant, really the scenarios where Oshkosh makes it to the Sweet 16 but is not hosting are when Hope and a team east of Hope also make it to the Sweet 16. So that means Transylvania to come out of the Whitewater pod, or Genesee or DeSales to come out of the Wash U pod would be required in addition to Oshkosh and Hope, for the host to shift to Hope instead of the higher seed Oshkosh for geographic reasons.
It would be a coup, to say the least. Obviously, the top folks, when you're looking at your bracket, the top one in each of those quadrants is the one who's the top seed. So NYU, Scranton, Oshkosh, W&L are considered the top seeds, and thus who we would think is hosting, barring, as Scott said, any upsets along the way. Who's got the easiest?
And then the Washington and Lee quadrant, there are kind of some pretty likely scenarios where Washington and Lee would both be in the Sweet 16 and not host. The most likely one is Bethel, John Carroll, and Trine winning their pods. So Trine coming out of the Denison pod. And in that scenario, that would be a John Carroll, as both Trine and Washington and Lee can get there. But there's only, there'd be only one team within driving distance of Washington and Lee. So that's why it would flip to John Carroll. And then there are scenarios where Denison hosts that sectional, but all of them would be if Washington and Lee has been eliminated.
Gotcha. So Denison hosts if W&L is out, most likely. Right. Got it. Interesting. Yep. And what's crazy is Denison's playing Southern Virginia in the opening round. Southern Virginia is essentially across the highway from W&L. Sorry, geographic joke, or interesting note on my part. All right. So who do you think, Scott, from the breakdowns and all of that, the sims and everything, has the easiest or hardest routes to the titles?
So what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily the easiest or hardest, but the who is most likely to end up moving forward, which is going to include their own team strength. And I have Scranton as the most likely to move through almost every single round. So they end up with the highest rate of winning the national championship. Again, just purely relying on each team's current efficiency margin, which a lot of that goes out the window in single elimination matchups, which is why we love March. But then the most likely other outcomes are NYU, Washington and Lee, Oshkosh, Johns Hopkins, and Hope. Are the 6 teams with at least a 1% chance via the chained win probabilities of becoming the national title.
So who you picking? You going with your Sims?
At this point, it would be pretty hard to pick against Scranton, who has been good all year and has been absolutely incredible over the last quarter or the last third of the year. It seems like they've turned it into a different gear. And I think it would be really hard to pick against Scranton. But there are very plausible reasons that, any number of teams can end up in the Final Four and be in that single elimination chance. NYU, very, very talented and battle-tested. Washington and Lee, led by Schleisner with a great supporting cast. Oshkosh is in every game that they play, make lives very difficult for their opponents. Hopkins, strong all year. Hope with a great top end. WashU's got a dynamic duo. Just keep going down the list. There are easy reasons why these teams can keep advancing throughout the tournament.
You're required to say Hope, right?
Not required, but I think they fit in the conversation.
Just making sure. Yeah, listen, I think you just pick Scranton to avoid the hate mail is what it is. No, I tend to agree with you. I think NYU, until proven otherwise, will always be, in my opinion, the team to beat. But certainly, Scranton seems to be playing. I mean, come on. They destroyed Elizabethtown by 40 in the title game. They have been walking through that conference, practically sleepwalking would make for better games. It's kind of scary. We'll see how it plays out. Any other thoughts before you want to share with everybody before we let you go?
Not a ton. This whole analysis that I have done, which we've talked about 2% of it, I will put up on my website that people can peruse, and I'm going to be attempting to have it update throughout the tournament as teams get eliminated. But I think I always try to prepare people for that sectional round possibility of the highest seed not being able to host if a certain 4 teams make it through. And we can often see it coming pretty far in advance. And who knows how much it would lessen the sting for the top team not being able to host, but a little bit of extra warning never hurts.
No, it doesn't. Tell everybody where your website is.
It is thed3statlab.com.
Perfect. Hey, Scott, appreciate the breakdown as always, sir. Enjoy this time of year. I know you will, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Thank you, Dave.
Scott Peterson joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline. There you go. Nice, quick, done and dusted. Good stuff from Ryan Scott and Scott Peterson. Also, thanks to Kristin Hughes. When we come back, we will hear from Cam Fuller on the men's side. Then Pat Coleman will join us to react to that and answer any other questions you may have. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com. From the WBCA studios, it's the Brackets Breakdown Special.
For the love of the game. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that. A lot more.
Sure, the game is important. But as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. And in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
We are the coaches of women's basketball. We are leaders and teachers, dreamers and winners. We are professionals who conduct ourselves ethically and with integrity. We place the education, safety, and well-being of the athletes we coach above all else and teach them the fundamental values they need to succeed in life. We are coaches united for the good of our game and those who play it. We are the WBCA.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC1927. That's NABC.com or NABC1927 on social media.
Responsibility is being accountable for your words and actions, first and foremost. It also is an obligation to be a positive influence in the communities around you. Being in a D3 program, you're going to have lots of different opportunities. You're not just an athlete, you're also involved in student life. Your academics are extremely important. We give a lot of our student athletes responsibilities right from the start by giving them leadership opportunities, by having them engage in the community, be a positive influence. That's being a responsible person.
There are over 480,000 college athletes. Only 2% will go pro. That means over 470,000 will not get a shoe contract. No autographs. No private jets. No fan clubs. No Hall of Fame inductions. Instead, they will walk away with something much more valuable.
I did receive a non-athletic scholarship upon entering school.
I got the presidential scholarship, which was huge for me.
I think there's more opportunities for academic scholarships in Division III.
I did receive academic scholarships. Just being involved on campus, being a leader, all those things combined kind of get me recognized. It's a great experience for me.
Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. On this bracket breakdown special, I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Thanks to Pat Coleman earlier for filling in for me on the NCAA tournament shows, bracket shows. I really appreciate it. Voice is holding on for this one, but it's not going to hold on for long. If you got questions for us, tweet us at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. Email us, hoopsville@d3sports.com. You can join us on our live stream as well. We'll try and answer questions there. There are certainly some people there who are jumping on and chatting. We certainly will try and do our best. I was pivoting to men's basketball and its bracket. We talked to Cam Fuller earlier. This is not a live interview, to talk about what the decisions were made today with, well, over the weekend, I should say, with how they were tackling the tournament and what they had ahead of them. What decisions got made in terms of flights? What got decisions made in terms of where teams were bracketed and all of that? Cam Fuller joined us earlier on the Hoopsville Hotline. Well, Cam Fuller, welcome into the show, as it were. We just saw you recently. I know you've been busy. Thanks for the time. First and foremost, I think the most important question for everybody is, how late were you working last night?
We were very efficient with our time. I think we were out of the committee room by around midnight last night, and I'm coming to you from an airport right now on my way back to Green Bay. So great to spend some time in Indianapolis with our group.
I'm curious. We'll start off with just flights, because I think that's what everybody catches everybody's attention. It's interesting. You could have done this with fewer flights. Maybe you could always argue with more flights, right? And we talked already on the women's segment of this, where it feels like they got a little bit tightened up to 4 flights. You got 4 flights. Do you think there was maybe some even-handedness here? Hey, we're giving the women 4, we'll give you 4?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it really goes back to what you and I have talked about since I popped onto your show the first time, which is really trying to build a national bracket, trying to avoid, if possible, conference matchups in the first 2 rounds, trying to avoid, if we can, prior year first-round NCAA tournament matchups. And then really, I think what's most important is really looking at the S-curve and trying to keep teams on their S-curve when at all possible. So, no, I don't think it came down to we get 4, they get 4, we get 5, they get 5. I think it was just that's where we landed, knowing that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, the Hood move was to save flights.
Well, yes, Hood was to save flights. But interesting enough, short time before you and I are talking, Matt Snyder made an interesting point. If you got the 4 flights, if that's what you were aiming for, you could have kept Redlands at home, still flown Claremont Mud Scripps out, had the same number of flights, keeping Mary Hardin Baylor in Texas and putting Whitworth and 2 others in California. Like, you still could have managed that with 4 and allowed Redlands to stay home. And I know Eric Bridgeland's always been vocal about, hey, we enjoy the travel, it's okay. Was that even an option? Did you guys consider that? What were the permutations that you guys had regarding Redlands?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember what the Champs Committee directive was, which is, our goal and our directive is to protect the top 8 teams, and that started last year. We'd like to protect every team if you could, as you build a 64-team bracket, but we can't do it at the detriment of the 500-mile threshold. So if you look at what we tried to do, we really tried to balance the bracket. And if you look this year, we don't have a team within their pod not on their seed line, meaning if you look at the 14 pod, every team that should be a 2, 3, 4 was there. And if you look at, I think we did the math this morning, of the 64 teams, 54 of them are within 4 spots of their S-curve line. So that was really what we tried to do, is ensure that, sure, could you move a team here or there, but it might be at the detriment of balancing the bracket.
So you thought that having a Redlands pod and shipping anybody in that you could and all that would have affected both the top 8 and some of the other seeding you were trying to do?
I mean, I think in terms of what we could not have a Redlands pod at the detriment of creating more flights. So that was really where we felt like, as we kind of built the plane, was if we want to have a really, really balanced bracket, which I think we have, we can't do it with the amount of, with adding more flights to the equation.
It's interesting. I think you might see Matt's point. You might see something a little different, but again, it's everybody's perspective, right? Because we can't hash it all out, and now we're looking at it after the fact too, so we can slip those things out. You did send Redlands to the East Coast again. Again, Eric doesn't mind the travel. Was that the best option you guys felt? There wasn't anything maybe Midwest or somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, the flights are always a challenge because one thing we try to do is, we try to send teams into airports that are at least somewhat accessible. And, when we looked at, even if you look at the Gustavus pod, we have Mary Hardin Baylor going there, that was actually really helpful for us because we were able to not have a pod with all 4 teams from Region 9, for example. So that was one thing that, if we look at the 16 pods, 13 of them have at least 3 regions represented. So I think it goes back to a point I made is we really tried to balance it. And we also really tried to create a national bracket. That's something that I've told you from our first conversation is we're going to do our best to create a national bracket and hopefully hold seeds as close as possible. And that was really, kind of 2 of the guiding posts among many that we tried to do when we built this bracket.
Let me start in that upper corner Trinity pod. One thing that jumped out is Babson feels like a really tough number 2 for the overall number 1, if you follow. So Babson being a number 2 seed seems like they're the toughest of the 2 seeds that Trinity gets as the overall number 1. Now, the lowest number 2 is Bates. And I realize you don't want Trinity and Bates necessarily matching off in the second round. So we get that, but there could have been some other permutations. Is that one of those things where you do your best? What was kind of the mentality of putting Babson in that pod?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it really came down to maybe a couple things that are important to note is as we looked at, again, the 500-mile threshold, as we looked at balancing the bracket as best as possible. If you look at the S-curve, Babson is the furthest one off. I think they're 11 spots off of their S-curve. I think as we thought about the matchup, they're playing St. Joseph's of Maine, which if you look at balance-wise, they're playing an opponent pretty close to where they should be playing. But to your point, that does mean that Trinity is going to have a higher 2 than is on the S-curve. But it really came back to balancing the bracket, and it came down to regionality from a 500-mile threshold.
I'm going to jump on some other stuff regarding that in a minute, but I do want to go back. Interestingly enough, it looks like, unless we've missed something, there are no conference rematches at all in the opening weekend. And it looks, as you point out, tried to have no rematches for the opening from last year's tournament necessarily. That said, I did notice Gettysburg's going back to Wesleyan where they were last year. So it didn't see. It looks like you tried to accomplish some big things like the conference rematches, and some things kind of either got missed or you couldn't avoid or something along those lines.
Yeah, that was one thing we worked really hard on, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a moment, but the interconference. I mean, we that was our goal. We want to avoid no conference matchups in the first 2 rounds, and it became tricky in the Midwest in particular when you looked at where the 2 seeds fell with the YX schools, with Gustavus hosting. So we had a ton of permutations in the Midwest, but usually it led to the same result. And then that was something we also tried to do is not necessarily avoiding where you're going, but avoiding the first round matchups in the NCAA tournament. So that was something that we felt good about where we landed. And then the regular season matchups, I think if chalk holds, I think we maybe have one regular season repeat matchup, the Trinity St. Thomas, Texas, related if chalk holds. So we also really try to just keep that in mind of, obviously we're not going to have the repeats from the first round, but I think there's very minimal, maybe that one example I shared in terms of chalk hold for the second round as well.
I think depending on what we talk about chalk, Gettysburg and Wesleyan played, I'm double checking it live on air because that's always a mess. Yeah, they played earlier this year to a 3-point game. So that could potentially be another one of those. You talk about balance. We look at the Montclair and the Wisconsin lacrosse pods. If you swap them, you save yourself a second weekend flight. Is this coming down to the balance of the bracket, to the seating of the bracket, et cetera, that you didn't swap them and you're going to get that flight potentially in that second weekend?
That's exactly what it means, is we really tried to keep the seeds balanced. So yeah, that's if you look at that piece, we kind of gave it as a give to say, hey, we want to build the best bracket possible and try to keep as tight to the S curve as possible. And that's what we did in that situation.
Looking at Worcester and Newman, this is kind of going deep in the hole, as it were, but Worcester is actually a higher seed than Newman. It seems like maybe those two should have gotten swapped. Is that something that just happens, is missed, is the shakeup of the weekend, as it were?
But one more time, Dave. I'm just following along with you.
Worcester State and Newman. Technically, Worcester State is higher ranked, I believe.
Sure. Yeah, so I think as we looked at that, I'm looking at the S curve. I mean, they're basically all within 2 spots of the S curve. And then as we just broke down the regionality of things, that's where things, the 500 mile, our lovely target we have to hit. That's where some of what I called in prior calls, the horse trading happens. So that's where it's like, hey, how do we build as close to the seed as possible with also understanding the 500 mile variation? So there's going to be some, I would say, quirks to that, but it kind of goes back to a point I made, which was, we have 54 or 64 teams within 4 spots, which is what we consider a line. So you got 4 teams on a line. We have 16 teams, so 4 lines of 4. And 54 of those teams are within 4 spots, which we were very pleased with.
When you look at, I know you all were doing mock bracketing all the way up into this point. The weekend resulted in a lot of shakeup in kind of the mid seeds, 2, 3, 4, 5 region, where things moved a lot because of upsets and changes of results, or not change of results, but results and how those all changed out. I'm curious, did you guys work from the mock bracketing that you had and made tweaks where you needed to make tweaks and adjustments? Or did you literally start from scratch on Sunday and try and recreate? There are parts of it looks like you could have done one, and there's parts where maybe you did the other.
It's a really good question. And I think I shared this on some of our other conversations, which is I see the bracketing early on is just good to get our committee in the mindset of this is how we build a bracket. This is how we're going to discuss, like to the point of earlier, we're going to try to keep seeds as close as possible on the S curve. So yeah, the amount of brackets we created and we threw in the trash, it looked like an absolute landfill, our committee room, in terms of all the paper we threw away last night. But that's kind of comes with the territory, right? So I mean, really what we tried to do was we plotted out the top 16 and then we worked backwards with 64 backwards to really ensure that the 1-4 matchups are solid. Then we went back up to the top of the 2 and then to the 3s. And that's really how we as we built mocks throughout the year, that's what we felt like, again, protected the top 8 best, is if you really ensure that they're, for lack of a better term, playing teams that are more closely aligned to them on the S curve.
When you look at, by the way, times have come out. We know it's spread out. It's certainly there for everybody. You guys have gotten what you needed. Obviously, Yeshiva will kind of start things off earlier with their timing and all of that. But when you look at how you try to construct the game times and such for who plays when and where, was there a strategy, or was it more along the lines of this is appropriate based on timing and location and the teams involved?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes into the teams involved. Are there any intricacies with the facility involved? And then knowing that we have the 2 time zones to play with, where are we going to put the Eastern, where are we going to put the Central? So if you look at it, you'll see a lot of the later games are in the Central time zone, and the earlier ones are in the Eastern time zone. And then the point you made with Yeshiva, knowing that we'll have the 1 o'clock game split session at Montclair and the second game at 5:15 Eastern time.
And then obviously, should Yeshiva win, they'll be played after sunset on Saturday. If it's not, I assume you'll have an earlier game time.
Yeah, our plan there is we have basically 2 game times. It says TBD on the bracket, but we have a 5:15 or an 8:30, and that just depends on the results from the first round.
Certainly logical. Hey, did you have anybody you wanted to host and didn't put in to host, or any of those scenarios where you had to redo your bracket because of logistics?
We talked about this on one of our calls, and I said it a little bit tongue in cheek, but I wish everyone could bid to host, especially the second weekend when we have 1 game. So there wasn't anything that was like, oh, my goodness, this is going to throw the whole bracket up because 5 teams didn't bid. It really came down to truly the priorities I talked about at the top, which was, trying to build the best bracket, trying to keep things seated, try to build a national tournament. And then obviously the minimizing flights. So in terms of that, I think the one piece I mentioned earlier was the Midwest was interesting because, and when I say Midwest, I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, so I think of Midwest like here to Chicago, but it's more than that. You have Gustavus, we had Chicago, we had Illinois Wesleyan, but then we had this cluster of Midwest schools, especially the WIAC and that 2 line. So it made things really interesting in terms of how do we, again, to the point I've been making the whole time, make a national bracket, ensure we don't have 4 teams from the same region. Oh yeah, and then by the way, we stuck to, I think 4, like you said, 4 flights is what we had. So that was definitely a fun challenge for us, was to be able to build that with kind of the construct of what the Midwest looked like.
How did you divvy up everybody? Did people have specific jobs, different and specific responsibilities, or is everybody doing everything?
Good question. It feels like organized chaos, but really what we tried to do was, we spent a lot of yesterday just triple, quadruple checking data. We had our racks going at it. We had a kind of a buddy system where each committee member was paired with a buddy. And that's when we really dug into what I would say the lines, meaning we got 16 sites, like really digging into conferences, really digging into regular season matchups, digging into prior year NCAA tournament matchups. So we did a lot of dividing and conquering, and our group was unbelievable. I was really pleased with our vice chairs, Jeff Gorski, Paul Booth, and then the other 7 committee members. I mean, everyone really stepped up, and we had great leadership from the NCAA office, and Amir Hicks, Alex Dickey, Alex Mortal. I mean, we had so many people. We actually talked about that as Jeff Gorski and I were walking back to the hotel last night. It was like the amount of people we had in the room to help us from the NCAA. I think we had 5 staff members, it felt like, at some point in time that were engaged with us, because there's just so much that happens. I mean, once we had an idea on the bracket, then, Jim Haney's getting all the officials into RefQuest, and people think like officials just show up. Like, no, you got to get a schedule into RefQuest, and you got to assign the officials. Then you got to make sure that they're in the right spots. So, I mean, that was a task. Honestly, that was something Jeff and I talked about last night, is I don't think people realize all of the administrative work that happens behind the scenes that our friends at the NCAA do to make this an unbelievable championship.
What were your biggest hurdles?
Well, I think we talked about a few of them, right? Is we know we have the flights. We know we had the Midwest makeup. We know we have the kind of what I'm going to call the schools out east as well. And then how do we kind of balance it? And again, if you would have said a month ago, hey, you're going to be able to keep 54 of 64 within 4 spots where they should be, I would probably said, yeah, I'd be really pleased with that. And some of it's luck, right? Some of it's just, that's what happened. That's who won. That's who the 16 hosts were. And then some of it, we tried to be creative with where we sent teams. And then certainly trying to make sure that we just build a national bracket. I think if you look at some of those stats that I shared, I think we were able to achieve that, knowing that going into the weekend, you think you're going to have these 16 hosts, but you don't know that until, that last ball drops on Sunday night.
And what are you looking forward to with this tournament? Obviously, there's Indy and there's the 16, but in terms of the bracket and what you guys have devised, what is some of the stuff that has intrigued you and excited you?
Yeah, I think just some of the matchups, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I say this a little bit tongue in cheek to our committee, which is, we're going to spend a ton of time building the bracket, but now the fun really begins, which is the tournament. I mean, that's what people are here for, is to see these matchups, is to see our student athletes competing at such an incredibly high level. So when I look at some of the matchups, we're seeing some national matchups right out of the gate. We're seeing some really intriguing matchups. So I think that's what excites me, is just the work that our committee put in. And now what I say the fun really begins, which is let's play the games and let's crown a national champion in Indianapolis.
Maybe a little too early to ask this, but or know the answer, I should say. But do we know if there's going to be any split sessions in this opening weekend or anything along those lines? I mean, for example, St. Thomas has a small gym. We know that. Any special circumstances other than the yeshiva, which we've spoken about?
Yeah, we spoke about the yeshiva, and now, in terms of our game times, I mean, we have basically a 2.5 hour gap between games, meaning, if it's a 3 o'clock game, the next game's at 5:35. So give or take, some games are 3:30, then they're 6. So that's really our plan, but obviously we'll work with hosts here. We have a call shortly with our hosts. We have a call with the team. We have a call with our site rep. So we'll really start to dig into that. I know our team at the NCAA is really, that's kind of what they've been working on really since midnight last night, which is approving budgets, which is looking through, just everything related to that piece. So that's something that, we'll spend, here probably the next 24 hours really starting to narrow in on, are there any intricacies to a site that we need to make sure that they're prepared? Because ultimately we want to ensure if a team wants to bring their fans, we have room for that. So that's something that our team at the NCAA does a great job on.
And then the other question I would ask is, did you ever decide to just take Ryan's mock and submit that and see where it went and save yourself the time and not working till midnight?
I think, Dave, when we first looked at a bracket, and forgive me for the number, but we just said, what would a perfect bracket be? And this was like Friday, so obviously a lot of things change. And I think we were at 28 flights. So that 28 flights, we got down to 4. So I guess we should get a gold star in that regard. But
no, that's a failure. That 24 out of 28 is a horrible number.
Yeah, but that's kind of that's I guess the fun of it, right? Is we do that, and I know we've talked about that in a couple of conversations. It's fun to see what kind of a perfect bracket looks like, and then how do you slowly manipulate things without blowing the whole bracket? I know I use the Jenga analogy with you, and even when we talked about the Babson example, it's like, hey, that's something where we're willing to pull. We don't think it's going to pull the whole bracket down, but if we were to say keep a school in their seed line, boy, then it might just pull the whole bracket down. So that's what I think. What I'm most pleased with the bracket is I think we were able to do it in a way that we didn't kind of tumble the whole thing to maybe save one priority that in the end isn't really all that important.
Well, I appreciate the time. I know you got to go. I've got to go as well. But thank you for finding some time out of your schedule and travel to sit down and chat with us about it. I'm sure we'll break it down in many other ways and chat in the future. And I know I'll see you in the relatively near future. As always, though, we get the guests their last word. Any final thoughts for those who are intrigued by the tournament and the bracket and all that?
Yeah, I just appreciate, everyone out there that's really supporting D3 basketball. It's a great product. I think this is kind of what I said before, which is the fun really begins, which is let's crown a national champion. So for those of you near a city, get out there, go watch some really good basketball. And thanks to you, Dave, and for all of those that are covering D3 hoops at a really high level.
Well, thank you, Cam. Appreciate all the time you've given us this season, and then we'll look forward to catching up soon.
Great. Thank you.
So there you go. Cam Fuller giving us a breakdown of the tournament. Seems maybe he was alluding Babson going somewhere else. I'm not sure. We'll talk to Pat Coleman coming up on how his read on that was. All in all, I think the bracket's pretty solid. Would Gettysburg going back to Wesleyan a second year in a row be a better choice? Yeah, maybe. We can certainly pick at those things. And we will when Pat Coleman joins me when we come back. If you got questions for us as we break down the bracket and whatever, send them our way. Hoopsville at d3sports.com. Don't forget, go to buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. Become a Hoopsville member as well. You can also tweet at us at D3Hoopsville. We'll take a quick break. Pat Coleman on the other side. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA studios.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
For the love of the game, but for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that, a lot more.
Sure, the game is important, but as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics, and in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
Something I discovered in myself is that if I have a goal, then I can accomplish it.
it's a well-rounded experience.
At a Division III school, you primarily a student athlete, so the school is really shaped around you developing yourself as a complete individual.
It helps a lot that you have a family with your team that can guide you.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit nabc.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC1927. That's nabc.com or NABC1927 on social media.
I believe sportsmanship is a mutual admiration and respect for your fellow competitors. We all go through a lot to reach the point where we compete against one another. It's important to realize that. So once we're finally on the field or on the court or on the starting block, we look at each other as fellow human beings and not just competitors. Being able to recognize the hard work that other athletes are putting in creates a more positive and inclusive environment.
We've got more.
And welcome back to Hoopsville. As we continue to roll along on this bracket breakdown special, reminder, Thursday show will be on at noon Eastern, and it's already starting to turn into a super show. We're going to have to pare down who I want to talk to. We'll figure it out. We'll get you guest list as soon as we can. Reminder, next week, the shows will be at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Monday and Thursday. Not from the Hoopsville studios. We're going to work on the logistics, but I'll be coming to you from a hotel room somewhere on a business trip. But always go to d3hoops.com for the latest. Looks like we got a bracket challenge out there from our friends at D3 Photography as well. Look for the information and links for that if you'd like to jump on and see if you can show us how smart you are on D3 brackets. Already heard from both committee chairs. I heard from Scott Peterson kind of breaking down the women's bracket. Heard from Ryan Scott looking at both as well. And now we'll turn to Pat Coleman to understand what he thought he understood on those brackets. And now I'll formally also say thanks for filling in. I'm having trouble getting through this show, so I'm glad I didn't have to try and record earlier shows today.
Well, I appreciate that. It's good to, be the righty in the bullpen for a situation like that. I wish I'd had the opportunity to also shout you out on the show. I did not really, get that the mic open at that time, the appropriate time to do so. But, it was a lot of fun, obviously. Good to work with two guys who have done this a lot, and Will Haskett especially. He and I did football selection shows back, 10 some years ago, maybe longer. So it's a guy who knows how to pronounce Division III schools, which is super helpful in that job. It's really hard if you just throw in a brand new studio host into D3. That is tournament bracket show on hard mode, where you've only heard of, a quarter of the schools. This was much easier.
Yeah, it's not Alabama or any of the D1s you've heard over and over and over. All right, so Ryan's helped with a little bit already, but now you've gotten a chance to hear our conversation with Cam Fuller. I guess I'll just kind of put the ball in your court, or do you want to head?
Well, I made some notes. I'm going to start with the positives. One of the things he mentioned was really wanting to do a national bracket, and that is one of the things where having Redlands go to Hood is a big benefit there, right? That really does add to it. Also, of course, as we talked about, flying Claremont out, flying Mary Hardin Baylor out, flying Whitworth out looks like it's a national bracket, but those of us who know Division III know that this is just a Region 10 going to Region 10. I think those are all good, right? The attempts to make it a national bracket are pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, I have no qualms with the nationality at all. In fact, for the most part, I don't have a ton of qualms about the tournament in general. There's little things here and there, but I thought the effort to try and keep it as diverse as possible, to keep conference championships out of the first, or conference rematches out of the first weekend, to try and keep as many rematches out of the opening round as possible. I'm maybe a little harder on trying to make sure schools, it sounded Kristin made a point of saying that they didn't want people to go back necessarily to where they have been in the past. Could have worked maybe a smidge harder on that on the men's side, but in the grand scheme of things, no, I think they did a nice job of diversifying it.
Yeah, I think so too. I was interested that Cam Fuller talked a lot about the 500-mile rule and seemed to be using it as an excuse for not seeding Babson correctly. I'm not entirely sure why that was the issue.
I'm not sure either.
Right? Ryan Scott is all like up in our chat, like Babson should have gone to Montclair. I mean, that's awesome. Babson could have gone to Mary Washington too. They went through all the, boy, there's no nice way to say this. They went and hid the mileage calculator from people like us, right? Because they didn't want to be held accountable for it. But it seems like
they being those who run it, we should point out. Those who run the mileage calculator.
Right, exactly. By IT, for lack of a better term, really, not by, the Division III leadership or anything like that. So they definitely can get to Mary Washington. That's true. Obviously, St. Joe's of Maine can't get to Mary Washington, but Babson can play a lot of teams, and St. Joe's of Maine could play a lot of teams. That is not the only possible matchup for that. If I were, if I'm Trinity and I'm facing number 21 in the second round instead of number 32, which is what it's supposed to be, and I think in our mock we sent them 30 and 34. That was as close on the S curve. That's another big buzzword, right? That we could get. I'd be really upset. That's not an appropriate. It's not an appropriate matchup in the world of NPI. We got to be better than that. If it's 54 teams within 4 spots on the NPI. That's good. That's a nice big bell curve in the middle. These outliers could be fixed too. There should not be. Babson should not be 11 spots away, essentially. And Trinity, more importantly, Trinity shouldn't have to deal with that. And Babson deserves a better potential second round opponent than the number 1 ranked in the NPI and the D3Hoops.com top 25 and the defending national champs.
Yeah. No, it's definitely probably the one big qualm on that one, and it certainly jumped out to a lot of people when we spotted it. We mentioned this with Ryan earlier. There's also the Bates playing Yeshiva, F&M playing Cortland. You could flop that F&M and Yeshiva, Bates and Cortland. Me personally, I think that's splitting a little hairs. Ryan kind of understood that one too, but I think the Babson one, and I don't think to his Jenga reference that Cam gives, I don't think pulling the Babson and putting him somewhere else pulls on the Jenga either. I think you just swap them with. I don't even remember.
Jenga comes up in the Midwest, which is well more than just that narrow line between Green Bay and Chicago, right? That comes up a lot, though, right? If you were to, there were a limited number of teams we could send to Illinois Wesleyan. There were a very limited number of teams we could send to Gustavus Adolphus, especially if we were, and I think it's important, trying to avoid, regular season rematches. So we couldn't bring Whitworth to Gustavus Adolphus, for example, although that would be a natural place to send them because of the flights. That's why it makes sense for Whitworth to go to Texas and Mary Hardin Baylor to come up to Gustavus. I do admire all of that work that they've done to prevent those things from happening, because we've certainly seen it in the past where that wasn't cared for, where it was only the very limited letter of the law in that it's only conference rematches and only the first round that must be avoided. This committee has gone above and beyond to make it a better tournament, and I want to be super clear and on the record that I am very happy about that.
So just to go back, Montclair has got Bates essentially as the other 2. You don't want to make that a cold swap because you don't want Bates sitting on the other side of Trinity. So let's now take Mary Washington in this case. Mary Washington's 2 is the WPI. I don't like making a cold swap there. But what you could have done was put Bates at Mary Washington, WPI.
Well, I don't think we could put Bates at Mary Washington from a 500-mile standpoint, right?
No, you're right. I apologize. You couldn't.
That one doesn't work, but I'm pretty sure there are scenarios which do.
Yeah, we probably would have had to find someone else because, at Wesleyan, it's NYU is the 2. Yeah, this might have been. I mean, because I don't like the idea of swapping WPI and Babson flat.
Right, Babson can't get to Randolph-Macon. It's slightly further. So that's kind of your outer boundary there. They get about 11 miles of give past Mary Washington, and you and I know that it's about maybe 20 miles and maybe an hour and a half in traffic on 95 to get from Mary Washington to Randolph-Macon. So
that stings back to my MLB life where I got a guy down there. Yeah, that hurts to think about. Yes,
or travel in the CAC, right?
Oof. Yeah, you know what? To be honest with you, as I start to unravel this a little bit more, I still want to solve it, but I'm curious where it would have been. And we don't need to go off this rabbit hole too badly. Obviously,
Ryan will solve it. You and I don't need to solve it.
Yeah,
that's why we have a bracketologist.
Exactly. Ryan Ryan did. He put it out somewhere, and I don't have it in front of me. So he did move. He moved several pieces around to make it work. So we'll reference to whatever.
I think Vassar was one of them, right?
I think you're right. We'll reference to his work. Anyway, moving on from that. It's interesting. I think I'd love to see them take a look at Matt Snyder's idea of how they could have still hosted at Redlands and still had the same amount of flights. Not the end of the world, because Redlands certainly isn't complaining about it, but it certainly intrigues me where you would not have had another Skyac sitting in California. That would have been a coup if you could have seen that one through. I think, and this is not a knock at the committee, I think when you look at a pod potential in the Skyac, your brain automatically thinks, well, that means we got to keep the Skyac there, the other Skyac there, because there's no way we can have enough. And I don't think you can then see the pieces. And to be honest, Matt's seeing them, and this is no knock on anybody, but Matt's seeing them after we put it together, right? So, or they put it together. So.
Well, I mean, you said that in the conversation with Cam, and that's certainly true. But remember, none of us essentially saw it until 1 o'clock, right? 1:30 Eastern today, and they all got to sleep on it and come back at it with fresh eyes, and they had the opportunity to get that too. I think.
Possibly. What I'm saying is, I don't think. Sometimes I think it takes. Sometimes we're humans, right? So again, the Skyac hosting means we must have a Skyac here, and not being able to see the other pieces until somebody finally presents it. Now in the future, it's probably out there to be taken. I think what I'm saying is I don't know if they necessarily would have seen it because they just automatically thought, well, no, if we got a Skyac host, it means a Skyac, and we're trying to avoid that. Let's move on.
Yeah, and I think that, Ryan certainly is our foremost person in thinking creatively, and that didn't come up for him. And we people like you and I were the foremost creative people on it maybe a decade ago, right? When it was decided that we no longer had to send Whitworth just to California or just to the Midwest, or no longer had to send Claremont Mudscripts the shortest possible trip. If we're putting them in an airplane, send them anywhere with a major airport. And I appreciate that's a reasonable that's a reasonable caveat. I hope that it does get into the into the brain space of the people who make those decisions. Since it didn't actually get put into a bracket, I don't know if it necessarily will, but we'll remember it for next time. And if not, Matt will remember it for next time, and I'm sure Ryan will remember it for next time too.
Oh, most certainly. I do like that there's
and
no
then maybe the committee will hear it from one of us again.
I also like they're kind of walking the walk. No conference rematches in the opening weekend, and we knew that could be a real challenging possibility with the WIACs and some others, and they got it to work without making the bracket too findangled to do it.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, if NPI continues down the road that it does, I think we have, these situations now where NPI is more likely to go deep into a conference roster than any human committee was willing to do, right? There, at some point, that committee, even if once you've put 4 NESCAC teams in under the old system, it's like, at some point, someone on that committee is going to have a hard cap and say, I'm just not putting a team that couldn't even get a first-round home game in the NESCAC tournament into the NCAA tournament, right? The math doesn't care, the MAT's going to put all those teams in, and it will be more challenging, especially in the Midwest. We saw it in football, which is a slightly smaller bracket and has its own challenges and doesn't have pods and all that. The challenges of trying to keep 4 WIAC schools away from each other in a 40-team bracket. But it generally got done, and a WIAC came out and won the whole thing. And, I think that we're going to have more of these instances. And frankly, here's the other thing too, Dave. We haven't mentioned this in a few months. The soccer is very, very similar. Soccer's very similar in terms of the number of schools that sponsor the sport, the nationality of the sport, right? It's not like lacrosse. It's not like field hockey, where it's a more compact map. These guys should be studying the soccer brackets also. And, how many NESCAC schools make it into the NCAA Division III soccer brackets in a given year? It's a lot. It's quite a bit. And what did I think was the women's soccer this year? Flew Bates to Texas or Bowdoin to Texas or something like that.
Yeah. No, there's. It's interesting because soccer at one point I thought was getting stuck, and then they kind of opened up, and now it's kind of like, oh, look at that over there. Lacrosse is getting there. We're not there yet, but at least lacrosse has started to take some pages out of these 2 books too. But no, I agree with you in some of these other scenarios. But again, it's funny, Pat. Look back at what we were talking about 10 years ago.
We talked. You mentioned bracket of death earlier.
Yeah, 15, 20 years ago. Like it's amazing how much this has evolved, and we're certainly not being negative. We're always looking to improve and have it be better. And to the committee's credits, they're doing for the most part the same. We're not heading in the wrong direction.
I would agree. Yeah, there's a lot of, if they wanted to backtrack, there's a lot of room behind us with there's not a lot of room behind me, but there's a lot of room behind us with terrible bracketing choices made in the teens and in 2009. There are a lot of bad things that could be done. We're generally, in the years that we're not moving forward, we're generally not moving back very far, or we're holding steady. So I do like incremental change is good. Incremental change forward is really good. And sometimes we make big leaps, and that's awesome too.
St. Thomas does host Belhaven, which is kind of neat. And then Trinity, Texas sits on the other side of that. Trinity at least won't see Rhodes for a while, if at all.
They're probably happy about that.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Whitworth will fly in there. Whitworth is used to traveling a wee bit. But again, Mary Hardin Baylor gets shipped out. Kind of a nice way of handling that.
Yeah, right. We talked previously about how it's a little somewhat restricted to send Whitworth to the Midwest because there's one team already in the Midwest that they can't play. Otherwise, it would be a rematch. And it's nice to pull, instead, right, a different 2 or I guess a different 3 out of there and send them up to the Midwest. We saw Mary Hardin Baylor have a grand old time at the D3hoops.com Classic back in December. So if I were the person picking Cinderella picks in Ryan Scott's NCAA tournament preview, I might have Mary Hardin Baylor on my list for a road team that can come out of that first weekend.
I would agree with you. I think they're a pretty darn good team. By the way, small little Evan Elberg, former Gettysburg assistant, is going to go play as head coach for TCNJ Johns Hopkins. There's a small part of me that just chuckles at little things like that. He knows that program a bit.
Right.
Listen, again, there's, Mississippi women are obviously going to play Emory. We kind of saw that coming. Some of these things make a lot of sense. Keuka playing Trinity makes a lot of sense. These teams are kind of surprises and into the tournament. But I also thought some other squads got some reasonable first-round matchups. Susquehanna, Redlands, that seems reasonable. Again, obviously it helps that Redlands got flown out to Hood. And again, if Ryan gets his way, he gets to see Hood versus Redlands on Saturday.
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that possibility. Good luck to him.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of great little kind of interesting matchups in the men's side. I don't know if there's anything more to break down there or any other thoughts. We can pivot to women before we let off too.
I mean, one other thing that I just I'm amused by the thought of Grinnell and John Carroll. John Carroll under the previous coach Moran was kind of similar in that they would run 5 guys in, 5 guys out. True. Obviously, without the press and the reliance on the 3-point shot that classic Grinnell would have. But that's a nice meeting of those two teams, sort of halfway in between Illinois Wesleyan. That's a matchup that I really like, and I'm glad we have more of that. Mount Union and W&J, they're not far apart at all, but they go all the way down to Christopher Newport. I like the Mount Union W&J matchup. I know the Pac has not had anything resembling success in the NCAA tournament, and I don't know that this year is the year that one of them breaks out, or that W&J breaks out and does it, but W&J and Mount Union play pretty often in a lot of sports, and I'm glad that there's a men's basketball game now too.
Grinnell feels like they've got the team this year that can maybe just do something. Maybe potentially the way they're playing. I like how he's augmented that system.
Well, and we talked about it. First of all, he and I talked about it on essentially this show a year ago. It's, the people are way better at defending the 3 than they ever used to be before, right? That's just the natural evolution of the game, right? It's along the same sort of things that has seen the gradual demise of the mid-range jumper, right? It's all layups, dunks / 3-pointers in a lot of places. Obviously, at the highest level for sure, and a lot of D3 schools are doing that too. It is the analytics say you should do that, so he's got to adjust, and I think he's done a great job of it. And it doesn't hurt. You got a big 6'9" big freshman big like Tyler Cope in the middle to finish and also finish defensively. You wouldn't want to not play front court defense if you've got that guy there who can swat 2.5 shots a game, right? And this is a guy who blocks 2.5 shots a game when he's playing 17 minutes. So, right? This is that's a big dimension too. I really enjoyed watching it, but it was of course fun to just sit there and watch and go. It is 8-7 here at the under 12 or whatever it was. That's just it's not like the last time I was at Grinnell when they played Wheaton and it was like 115-91 or something like that, when David A. II was playing rather than coaching. It's a good evolution. It's a great tweak. As someone who doesn't do X's and O's, I really enjoy that a lot. And I think, first of all, also Dave Grinnell's on a 3 line instead of a 4. That's a big deal too.
That's a good
point. You're not
point.
playing the host right out of the gate, right?
That's a great point. Yep. That's a great point. They're getting a little bit more. Their resume is more on the respectable side of that for sure. There's a lot of fun little matchups in here. Claremont Mud Scripts, Aurora, just things you won't see every day for 100, Alex. I got a kick out of WPI reacting to the fact that they're playing Emory. I think I heard in the video a groan. Not Emory, I apologize. Amherst. Jeez, can't even speak today. I think I heard a little groan. I think I heard a groan from them. They were working out. That was the wildest part of their video. Everybody else is in rooms and classes. They're working out, watching, and even Coach Bartley was working out. Got a good kick out of that.
Got to work off all those bacon cheeseburgers you can get at Bartley's restaurant, man.
That's true.
Those things are. Does he still? I don't even know if he still owns that place.
No, his brother doesn't own it.
There is. Yeah, all right. There is that's some good eating if you're in Worcester, Mass.
No, it's true. All right, let's quickly switch to the women before we sign this one off. For the most part, I kind of liked it. We can pick it apart and find things that aren't great, but they do have the Texas pod. They clearly wanted more flights to kind of break it up and do something else. Maybe Transylvania hosting would have allowed that to happen. They weren't able to do that. But for the most part, it's a national, as Ryan said, it's a national tournament. The second weekend certainly preserves that national feel to it. We're going to get definitely some flights in the second weekend.
I think just looking at the energy level of Kristin Hughes over the multiple conversations you've had with her over the past few weeks, like especially on top 16 night, she is all up in your face. She's energetic. She's pumped, right? And then, sort of got beaten down by the bean counter system a little bit in the course of yesterday, right? A lot more subdued. Obviously, she got some energy back before the end of that conversation, but I was like, yeah, I feel you. This is what this time of year does to well-intentioned people who really want to make good brackets but run into the money and then have to give the number 42 overall seed a top seed at home. And then they get offered up to presumably NYU in the round of 16, so it will eventually balance out. But that is unfortunate, and I don't need to belabor this point, but it was more or as much about just her body language. That it sucks to get beaten down like that. I know.
Yeah, they certainly meant well, and I think they had good intentions. It just didn't work out.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And obviously upsets have a lot to do with that too, right? There's other extenuating circumstances that played a role.
There's one upset, right? And I'm just being upset by Transylvania upsetting people by not doing their due diligence.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Bates winning is the big thing that makes it difficult. Bates having to playing its way into having home games really made the bracketing more difficult on that side.
Most certainly, yeah. Adding another one up there in the New England area, especially far New England, makes a difference. Otherwise, it's an interesting bracket. There's some fascinating matchups. Merchant Marine at Bates, I think. By the way, there was one bracket. Was it on the men's or women's side? And there might be a couple that are directly what Ryan created. And the reason I thought of that was because Merchant Marine Bates. There's some potentials to prove yourselves, right? There's also some potentials of respecting the seeds, respecting who these teams are, the resumes that they've put together.
Yeah, I think the Whitewater pod is a really good and interesting one. Whitewater has been trying to find its way this year. Obviously lost a lot of talent to graduation. They had a night where they just got obliterated by River Falls. There was one quarter that it was 21-3 or something like that, and they ended up losing that game. But you got Whitewater, you got Transylvania, which has certainly had success. You've got Chicago, which has had success. You've got Gustavus Adolphus, which has had success. And, maybe none of them is quite living up to that right now. That's an opportunity for whoever comes out of there to get some NCAA tournament games under your belt for what is almost exclusively in this group, younger squads. And then go into a situation where, now, if you're facing Hope or Illinois Wesleyan or something like that in the round of 16, you get a little momentum. You get your feet wet in the tournament, which you and I have talked going all the way back to like 2005. You want to be in that first round game. You can prove that you've done it. In all seriousness, that quote is like 20 plus years old.
Yeah,
man.
I know exactly where it took place.
Before
we had video.
In all seriousness, though. Right, that's super important if you've got a young squad where a bunch of your kids haven't played key roles in the NCAA tournament anyway. I really like that pod, and I think that whoever comes out of it, if nothing else, they're going to set themselves up really well for a good offseason and working ahead into 2026, and maybe still here this year in the round of 16 also.
You get matchups too. Again, Wisconsin Lutheran's going to take on St. Mary's. You got a chance to truly prove you're not being treated as a 4, you're being treated as a 2 or 3. You get a chance to prove what you claim you are. WashU and Geneseo in a matchup you just don't normally get to see, thanks to the fact that they're going to Ohio Wesleyan.
Yeah, I love that we have those 3 NCAC pods that can kind of hold the glue for these sorts of things. But yes, WashU and Geneseo, when I put those 2 teams next to each other, I was like, I must have mistyped this. Nope, that was correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. And then teams that are, I think, clamoring for that respect will have that chance to prove themselves, as it were. Hopkins has got an interesting pod. I don't think, others may disagree with me, but I don't think you can overlook Hunter, especially Hopkins, who is struggling to rebound right now. And then you got Baldwin Wallace and William Patterson on the other side of that. I mean, that's just a dandy of a little thing to take place at Goldfarb.
I mean, Alexa Charles is the kind of person who could absolutely take over a game like this in this kind of situation. This is more on the men's side, but Danya Baylor Carroll, I get his name right, the guy from Penn State Harrisburg a couple years ago. I feel kind of a similar potential situation here, and
at the same
certainly
gym.
Tied in my brain that both of those games are going on at Goldfarb Gymnasium in Baltimore.
I remember sitting there watching that, going, "Whoa, okay,
yeah."
Message
right?
received.
And he came in with a similar, a similar resume, right? 2,000-point scorer, for a good team in a conference that has not won a lot of NCAA tournament games. I think we'll write about Alexa Charles on the website this week. Look for a feature on that, and then we'll look forward to learning a little more and seeing what they do on the floor.
Yeah, very much a yeah, but, and then he went, no, yeah. Like here, this is for real. No, that was an amazing outcome. Unfortunately, on the tournament that fell short in the grand scheme.
Didn't finish. Yes.
Yeah, it didn't finish. All in all, I don't know what else to break down. I think we've got a fascinating bracket ahead of us, and I think we're going to have some really interesting champions and well-tested champions by the end of this.
What I like is so many of these 2-3 games are really, in my mind, toss-ups. Messiah, Cortland, Claremont, Whitman. I'm going to skip some because they're not toss-ups, but Otterbein, Randolph-Macon, the Baldwin Wallace, William Patterson game you mentioned, Ripon and River Falls, Wash U, Geneseo, Wisconsin Lutheran, St. Mary's, Chicago and Gustavus, maybe Gettysburg and CNU, maybe Trine and Shenandoah, New Paltz and Immaculata, maybe even the Atlantic East. If it continues to exist, doesn't have a whole ton of NCAA tournament success. I know I'm sorry to say it out loud, right? But, I'm counting how many teams they have.
That's an intriguing Immaculata team, though.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And imagine the headlines if they get out of that. The Immaculata, of course, one of the original homes of small college women's basketball before the NCAA really thought anything about having women's sports, and they were forced to compete in a whole separate association of their own making, the AIAW, and Immaculata on national television and filling big arenas in the Philadelphia area. And if Immaculata does that, it gets out of that first weekend, what a great story that would be.
It'd be awesome. Yeah, the Mighty Macs.
Mighty Macs.
Yeah, I love their coach. Love what they're doing there. It would be great to see them try and accomplish that. Yeah, again, we can quibble. We certainly have. There are some issues we would love to iron out, but I think even it'd be hard to find perfection. So because we want things to talk about. That's why. We don't want perfection.
I wasn't asking for 28 flights.
No, 28 flights was that would have been insane. Well, so I'll leave it on that. Any final thoughts then?
No, I think we're looking forward to all of those things going on here over the course of the next few days. I know that Ryan pitched and promoted already his NCAA tournament preview, which hasn't been written. You'll be able to find that on the website on Thursday. We will have, of course, other features, one of which I've previously mentioned. You should go do the bracket challenge. Go do the bracket challenge. Our friends at D3 Photo do that. That's at d3challenge.com. You should absolutely do that. And this is the most wonderful time of the year. I just got recharged by those two amazing conference championship events, venues, atmospheres that I was in this past weekend. And now I'm trying to decide, do I go to men's games at La Crosse or men's games at Gustavus or women's games at Bethel? Or what do I do next weekend, or some kind of mixing and matching of all of that? Because I'm looking forward to these two fields of 64 and making their way to two separate championships.
I'm tempted to see if I can get somewhere on Friday night, but I also have to be ready to travel for a week. So there's a yin and a yang. We'll have to figure it out. We'll see. If I
start packing now.
Exactly. And I got to pack some gear. Got to take a microphone and some stuff to go to take the show on the road. But Hey, appreciate the time.
More
Thanks
power
again.
to you. Thank you for doing that and not asking me to do that.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I'll do it. I got time in the evenings. But thank you for filling in for me earlier, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Sounds good. Good show, sir.
Thank you, bud. Take care. Pat Coleman joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline. Oh, no, about the tea. Oh, Phil, just reading a note for mine. Yeah, we've drank ourselves out of tea and honey in this house. Me primarily, has done so. And with that in mind, I'm going to sign off. I was thinking about doing a 2 cents about the timing of games, but I can save that for Thursday when I can formulate my thoughts a little bit better and talk about the timing on the women's side. But we'll get to that on Thursday. And with that in mind, Thursday's noon show will be a little bit supersized. I'm sure we'll have quite a few guests on to talk about their entry into the NCAA tournament and their hopes on the opening weekend. So tune in live, noon Eastern, for that one. And in the meantime, don't forget buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. That's buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. Sign up for a Hoopsville membership. You get the chance to access the Hoopsville, my top 25 ballot. We won't be doing a top 25 show this week. I'm gassed. So we're not going to be crazy here. And I have to do some other work tomorrow evening, it turns out. And in the meantime, there'll be an off-court podcast coming very soon. And with that in mind, we'll sign off. Thanks to Cam Fuller and Kristin Hughes for joining us on the show, talking about the national committee work that they did. And thanks for appearing on the last two shows, I should say. Pat Coleman, Ryan Scott, and Scott Peterson for appearing as well. Thank you to all you for joining in as well. Again, buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. Please support our work. And if you would like to send us a jersey, swag, or something to put on our something gear for us to wear, whatever it may be, email us, hoopsville@d3sports.com. That's hoopsville@d3sports.com. We'll get you all the information on how you can go about doing just that. Thank you for your support today. Hope you enjoyed the bracket breakdown. We'll see you on Thursday night, or Thursday afternoon, I should say, at noon Eastern, with more Hoopsville as we get ready for the NCAA tournaments.